Hello again, and welcome to our channel. I'm your favorite bearded quality engineer, Anthony, from testRigor. If this is your first time viewing content on this channel, testRigor is the #1 intelligent, generative, AI-powered, codeless test automation tool that lets you write test cases in plain English. If you don't believe me, visit testrigor.com for features, tutorials, case studies, and more. Before we get into the purpose of this content, let me share some background information for those new to Salesforce testing processes and role definitions surrounding the platform. Since its introduction, Salesforce has become the world's leading cloud-based customer relationship management platform, or CRM. It enables businesses to manage customer interactions, streamline processes, and accelerate revenue through automation, AI, and custom applications. As of 2025, Salesforce is not merely a CRM, but rather a scalable platform that provides solutions across sales, service, marketing, commerce, health, education, and financial services as an integrated ecosystem. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment letting us know your experience with Salesforce since its rollout. With Salesforce's highly extensible nature through configurations, custom code, third-party apps, and complex workflows, the need for quality assurance becomes mission critical. A single mistake in a trigger, integration, or security setting can result in the loss of data, or customer reviews, or legal problems. Thus, Salesforce testing should be thorough and make sure that business workflows are certified to work as intended, data integrity and security are retained, custom code does not break after updates, notably 3 times a year with Salesforce releases, integration ease with other systems, and reliable performance on support platforms. A Salesforce tester is a QA specialist focused on testing the functionalities of the Salesforce platform, its customizations, and integrations. Their responsibility is so much more than just clicking through a UI. They need to understand the underlying architecture of the system, the business logic, the security model, and all the workflows in the Salesforce implementation. Their roles include perform manual and automated test cases to verify Salesforce configurations, customizations, and workflows. Conduct end-to-end regression testing to confirm the stability after Salesforce upgrades and deployments. Have seamless data flow between Salesforce and external systems via API and middleware. Validate user roles, profiles, and sharing settings for appropriate data access and compliance with security standards. Using test automation tools like testRigor to create and maintain as many automated test cases as possible to minimize person hours and expand test coverage. Identify, log, and communicate defects effectively using tools like Jira or Azure DevOps for timely resolution. You can read more on our blog, Salesforce Testing, linked in the description. If you are a candidate for such a position, here are the top Salesforce testing interview questions that you might face in your evaluation that will put you in the front of the pack. Let's start with the first question. How is testing different in Salesforce compared to traditional web applications? You want to explain the implication of Salesforce metadata-driven nature and platform limitations, but compare it against traditional applications. Stress the shift in thinking about testing. Remember that Salesforce is a metadata-driven cloud platform with a multi-tenant architecture and strict governor limits. When testing, one should be mindful of the platform's declarative customizations like workflows, flows, validation rules, and record-level security. Testing also must accommodate triannual platform updates and tightly coupled modules, unlike traditional apps. Salesforce has a role-based hierarchy, which means security and access controls are not just complex, but more nuanced. Now for question 2. How do you validate the implementation of business logic using Apex classes and triggers? First, begin by explaining how you use the logic and then discuss how you tested it with a wider variety of data inputs, concentrating on assertions, coverage, and error handling. And an important point is that validation requires writing not only multiple tests, but also complex business workflows using various data scenarios to simulate the business logic. This includes positive, negative, and boundary cases to test the expected behavior. As a result, code coverage needs to be checked regularly in combination with assertion-based validations. Test suites should be tuned for bulk processing and governor limit compliance. Speaking of governor limits, question 3. What are governor limits in Salesforce and how do they impact testing? Start your answer by briefly stating what governor limits are and why they exist, and demonstrate how you simulate and validate their effect during testing. More specifically, governor limits are enforced in Apex execution to avoid excessive utilization of system resources, DML operations, heap size, etc. This ultimately helps in maintaining the stability of the system. The volume of order operations must be simulated to check for the chances of violations. Use custom logic to set these limits. Then tests should prove that they're handled in an efficient way. In production runs, monitor debug logs to make sure the limits are not breached. On to the next question. How do you approach testing custom validation rules and formula fields? At a high level, describe your verification processes for correctness, edge cases, and how data inputs affect formulas and validation constraints. Specifically, testing custom validation rules involves sending valid as well as invalid data and verifying the rules are being applied. Manually and programmatically validating formula fields, you can validate calculated outputs depending on various record values. You have to cover edge cases like nulls, conditional, logic, etc. Keeping items consistent between record types and layout is also important. Speaking of records, question 5 dives a bit deeper into the topic. What is the best practice for testing record level access in Salesforce? As an overview, you would explain how you would set up users with different profiles and roles and validate access with different sharing models. In particular, when testing record-level access, you need to be able to test with users that can have different profiles, roles, and sharing rules to get real-life access scenarios. What you need to test is that only authorized users have permission to view, edit, or delete specific records. You should also test organization-wide defaults, manual sharing, and the Apex sharing model. On to question 6. How do you test the Salesforce approval process? The broad approach would walk through submission, approval, rejection, and escalation scenarios, validate field changes, and record status. Particularly, approval testing involves submitting records through various approval paths, including multi-step and conditional steps. Scenarios should include initial submission, rejecting, recalling, and finally approving. Field updates, notification triggers, and locked record behavior are validated for each transition. In addition, we would need to check time-based actions and escalation rules. Related to workflow processing, here's question 7. How do you validate workflow rules and process builder logic? You would generally describe how to test for triggering logic, resulting actions, and branches based on conditionals traversed, such as inactive paths and edge cases. To be completely accurate, testing requires setting up conditions that invoke workflow rules and validating outcome field updates, email alerts, and tasks. Process Builder primarily deals with condition branches and action orders. Additional edge cases where records do not meet criteria must also be tested. It is important to monitor for unintended behavior, especially for re-entry criteria and recursive triggers. Now we will shift over to the topic of test coverage in question 8. How can one make sure of test coverage for complex Salesforce configurations? In principle, point out that you've used traceability matrices and coverage analysis tools. Also, you reviewed user stories to verify coverage. To elaborate, mapping configurations to test cases can be done with the help of a traceability matrix. Write test cases for all high-impact cases like field dependencies, conditional page layouts, and formula-based workflows. These should also include edge cases and negative scenarios. Reporting coverage and feedback from users of the acceptance tests help to identify areas that have not been tested. You can read more on our blog, Acceptance Test Driven Development, linked in our description. Now, on to question 9. How do you test changes in permission sets, profiles, and field level security? Generally, you can talk about testing access rights from different users' perspectives through the UI and APIs, as well as validating enforcement with Apex. More precisely, permissions are verified by logging in as various user types and confirming access to objects, fields, and tabs. We test both UI and backend access paths for enforcement. There should also be tests that cover scenarios with permissions disabled, negative tests. We also review who has visibility of a field on layouts and in reports. Now, question 10 covers application automation through batch. What are the key considerations when testing Apex batch jobs? You can start by explaining simulating batch execution, verifying data changes, and handling large volumes and errors gracefully. Getting more into the weeds, you would explain that testing batch classes involves simulating large data sets and using test.startTest and test.stopTest to mimic asynchronous execution. Validation includes checking processing accuracy, handling failed records, and correct scheduling. Logs should be reviewed to verify job completion and status. The test must cover all branches of logic, including empty batches and exception handling. Question 11 addresses the beating heart of Salesforce, data. How do you validate data migration into Salesforce? At 1,000 feet, talk about concepts such as data mapping, pre and post validation checks, data quality, and referential integrity to start. In total, validation includes verifying the accuracy, completeness, and integrity of migrated data using source to target comparisons. Post-migration testing includes checking lookup relationships, field mapping accuracy, and formula recalculations. Duplication prevention, data type enforcement, and record ownership must also be verified. Audit fields such as create date and created by should retain original values where necessary. On to question 12. How do you test record types in page layout assignments? The big picture approach is to describe how different profiles interact with record types and how dynamic page layout assignments is validated. For detail, testing includes creating records with different record types and verifying if appropriate page layouts and picklist values appear. Field level visibility, required fields, and section arrangements are also validated. Business processes assigned to record types are also tested for functional accuracy. Permission-based layout visibility must be cross-verified. Question 13 ties directly into ensuring high quality and experience. What is the importance of sandbox testing in Salesforce? As a candidate, you would start by highlighting the role of sandboxes in validating changes in a controlled environment before production rollout. A more verbose response would be to explain how sandbox testing allows safe validation of new features, configurations, and integrations without impacting production data. It facilitates early detection of defects and reduces deployment risks. Different sandbox types, developer, full, or partial, are used based on testing needs. Release validations and regression testing are usually conducted in sandboxes before going live. Shifting gears, question 14. How do you handle testing for multi-language or multi-currency organizations? Briefly explain how to test translations, locale-specific formats, and currency conversions in UI and backend validations. Specifically, tests must validate the proper localization of labels, messages, and templates across supporting languages. Multi-currency configurations require testing of exchange rates, currency conversions, and symbol placement. Reports, dashboards, and workflows must display values correctly in each currency context. Locale and time zone settings should also be validated across user profiles. Now, question 15 tackles a more difficult type of testing. What is the approach to test dependent pick lists and dynamic forms? Start by describing how field interdependencies are tested and how dynamic visibility rules are validated. More specifically, testing dependent pick lists involves selecting various controlling field values and testing if the correct dependent values are shown. Dynamic forms are tested for field visibility conditions and responsiveness to field value changes. Errors and required field messages are verified in both editable and read-only views. Scenario coverage should include field dependencies and record types. For managing this type of testing more efficiently, take a gander at our blog, How to Test Form Filling Using AI, linked in the description. Now, for more valuable insights in question 16. How are time-based workflows and scheduled actions tested? Generally, explain the setup of triggering conditions and monitor the execution of delayed actions. But specifically, tests should simulate record updates that trigger time-based workflows and validate action queues. Delayed actions, such as emails or field updates, must be monitored using time-based workflow queues. Test records can be advanced using scheduled job simulation. Escalation paths and exit criteria should be thoroughly validated. Moving on to a different topic, question 17. How do you test changes implemented via declarative tools like Flow Builder? Begin by mentioning testing logic branches, screen elements, loops, and fault paths in record or user-triggered flows. Incorporate more detail by explaining that testing includes validating the start conditions, logic branches, screen elements, and outcomes of the flow. Record-triggered flows should be tested for all scenarios that could initiate execution. Data updates, loops, and fault paths must also be covered. Logs and debug mode provide visibility into flow behavior. Now, question 18 can result in a real domino effect of trouble if not tested correctly. What should be tested when a new object is introduced in Salesforce? Start by generally discussing how to test object schema relationships, page layouts, automation, and access control. Then shift to specifics where tests must cover object permissions, field validations, record creation, and integration with related objects. Lookup and master detail relationships should be validated for integrity and cascading behavior. Workflows, reports, and page layouts must be confirmed for correctness. Object visibility based on profile and record type must also be verified. Reporting is the base of question 19. What key items are included in a Salesforce test summary report? First, list the metrics, insights, and documentation used to summarize test results and guide decision-making. Then add detail where a test summary report should include test execution status, pass-fail statistics, defect trends, and test coverage percentage. It must highlight critical issues, impacted areas, and risk assessments. Recommendations for go, no-go decisions are included. Traceability back to requirements or user stories is also provided. And now for our final question, number 20. How is risk-based testing applied in Salesforce projects? You should explain how risks are identified and prioritized. Mention how testing is aligned to mitigate those risks effectively. More specifically, risk-based testing involves identifying and prioritizing high-impact, high-probability features and customizations. Critical business processes, integrations, and heavily customized components receive focused testing. Lesser used or low-risk areas may receive lighter coverage. This approach optimizes effort while testing stability in essential workflows. Thanks for hanging in there with me. If you found this content helpful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And leave your comments and questions below. We're here to help you become the best QA professional you can be. I'm Anthony from testRigor, wishing you well-defined requirements, smooth pipelines, and clean regression runs. See you next video.